In this video, we're counting down the worst wedding deaths ever recorded. From a third-time groom whose unforgettable send-off erupts into a deadly explosion right in front of his guests, to a bride whose fairy tale walk across the clouds hides something no one could see until it was too late. It was July 19th, 2017, on a privately owned lakeside property in York County, South Carolina. The professional fireworks display had already ended. The crew was breaking down equipment on the far end of the lawn. The fire pit was still burning at the center, and guests were still gathered around it. Caleb James Morrow, 35, worked as an auto body technician in Clover, South Carolina. He had steady employment, a close family, and a long relationship with his fiancée, Amber Lee Carter, 26, that had gradually led to marriage. This was Caleb's third wedding after 2 earlier marriages had ended in divorce. Friends described him as reliable and even-tempered, someone who still believed this time would last. The wedding was held at a lakeside property chosen for its open lawn and distance from neighboring homes. A licensed fireworks company had been hired for the evening display, which ran without incident and ended on schedule. For his friends, the night carried extra meaning. They wanted this wedding to stand out, to feel bigger and more memorable than the ones before it. As the fireworks crew began packing up, clearing firing racks, and organizing equipment, several unused aerial shells remained in partially opened cardboard boxes near the launch area, their warning labels still visible. Most of the crew focused on dismantling larger equipment, leaving the remaining materials briefly unattended. Ryan Cole, 34, Caleb's best man and longtime friend, had been drinking heavily throughout the evening. Witnesses described him as visibly impaired, unsteady on his feet, slow to respond, and increasingly careless. Wanting to extend the celebration and make the night feel more unforgettable, he moved toward the leftover fireworks. Ryan walked to the former launch area and picked up one of the transport boxes. A few guests saw him carrying it and assumed he was helping with the cleanup. One person asked what he was doing. He didn't answer and kept moving. Inside the box were several unused aerial shells, each designed to be launched from a mortar tube. He carried it across the lawn toward the fire pit, where guests were still gathered in small groups, some standing within 10 feet of the flames. The fire had been burning for hours, with a deep bed of hot coals beneath the wood. Most of the area was dimly lit, with the fire providing the main source of light. Ryan tipped the shells directly into the fire pit. For a moment, it looked like nothing more than someone tossing debris into the flames. Then the first shell heated and ruptured. Without a tube to direct it, it burst at ground level, sending sparks and fragments outward in multiple directions. Guests flinched and stepped back. Within seconds, more shells began reacting to the heat. Some exploded inside the pit. Others shot out along the ground in short, unstable paths before detonating at low height. The fire pit turned into a source of uncontrolled blasts. People scattered, but the explosions came too quickly and from too many directions to avoid. Several guests were struck by sparks and fragments in the first moments, suffering minor burns. A portion of the sequence was captured on a guest's phone, showing the rapid detonations and confusion as people moved away. Then a larger shell ignited inside the fire. It did not rise. It shot sideways out of the pit in a low, unstable trajectory, traveling less than 10 feet before detonating. Caleb was standing within that distance. The explosion occurred at close range to his head. He collapsed immediately and did not move. Emergency services were called immediately. Responders arrived about 11 minutes later. Caleb was unresponsive with severe head trauma and was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as severe cranial trauma from a close-range explosion, consistent with blast pressure and fragment impact. The proximity made survival impossible. Ryan Cole was later arrested and charged. Investigators also reviewed how unused fireworks were handled during cleanup, leading to stricter enforcement of post-event safety protocols for professional displays. It was March 15, 2016, at an elephant camp in Chiang Mai Province, Thailand. Decorated chairs lined a dirt path leading into a clearing. A live band was already playing. Guests had been seated for several minutes. The elephant and his handler were visible at the far end of the path, waiting for the signal to begin. The bride, Jenny Lin, 29, and her husband, Kevin Lin, 31, were medical doctors based in Singapore who had traveled to northern Thailand to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at a private resort, turning the trip into a small destination ceremony. Wanting something more memorable than their original wedding, Jenny requested an exotic entrance. She had seen elephant processions in travel content and believed the animals were calm, controlled, and accustomed to people. The idea became the centerpiece of the event. The resort arranged the procession through a local camp that provided ceremonial elephant rides. The animal selected was an adult bull used for tourist events. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, signs consistent with early must, including gland discharge, restlessness, concerns were raised to management more than once, with a recommendation against using the animal in a close contact setting. The concerns were acknowledged, but the booking continued. The ceremony area was set with guests seated on both sides of a narrow dirt path, with a band positioned near the front. Jenny was to ride in a howdah mounted on the elephant's back and dismount near the altar. The path was short, the crowd was close, and music played continuously. No space had been set aside to redirect the animal if needed. The procession began smoothly. The elephant moved at a steady pace with its handler walking beside it, guiding it with quiet cues. Within the first minute, its movement began to change, slowing without command, ears spreading outward, head lifting higher than before. The handler responded with verbal commands and a firm tap along the neck, prompting it forward again, but the response was brief and uneven. As they approached the ceremony area, the environment shifted. The band grew louder, drums and amplified music echoing across the narrow path. Guests near the front stood up and leaned inward for a better view, some raising phones, others stepping closer into the path's edge. The space tightened. Movement increased on both sides. The sound, the crowd, and the confined layout combined within seconds. The elephant stopped. Its body is locked in place, its trunk lifted and curled inward, and its weight shifted sharply between its front legs. The signs were clear to the handler, who immediately began issuing repeated commands, trying to turn its head away from the crowd. There was no response. The noise continued to build, and a few guests moved closer, unaware of the change. Then the reaction came all at once. The elephant jolted sideways, a sudden, forceful movement that broke the straight line of the procession. Its trunk swung upward and across with speed, cutting through the space beside it. The howdah shifted violently with the motion. Jenny lost her balance. The platform tilted and she was thrown from the side, hitting the ground beside the path. The handler moved in immediately, reaching for control, while others rushed forward from the edges. But the elephant surged ahead in the same motion, its weight driving forward without pause. In that step, its front foot came down directly onto her. The force was immediate and overwhelming, pinning her beneath its full weight. The handler and others managed to redirect the animal within seconds, pulling it away from the path, but the damage had already been done. Emergency services were called as guests backed away in shock. Responders arrived about 19 minutes later. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examination determined the cause of death as severe crush injuries consistent with being stepped on by a large animal. The injuries were not survivable. Investigators later confirmed the animal had shown warning signs before the event, and that the combination of crowd pressure, noise, and close proximity likely triggered the reaction. The case was cited in discussions on safety standards in elephant tourism, particularly involving animals displaying early signs of instability. It was August 17, 2014, on a ranch property outside a small agricultural community in eastern Oregon. The evening air was dry and warm, the kind that had settled over the valley for weeks. 100 paper lanterns sat in boxes near the barn. The wind moved in no particular direction. Delia Marsh, 30, had spent most of her life in the same valley where she later married Caleb Turner, 32. She worked at a local feed store and was known as practical and unhurried. She didn't care much for elaborate details, but the lantern release mattered to her. After seeing it at another wedding in their village, she wanted something softer and more romantic for her own. She ordered the lanterns months in advance, hoping that moment would stand out. There was no formal coordinator. Family handled setup and decisions. The reception took place partly inside a working barn that hadn't been cleared. Straw bales lined the walls, and dry debris covered parts of the floor. The surrounding grassland hadn't seen rain in weeks. Humidity was low, and the wind shifted unpredictably. By late evening, the ceremony and reception had gone without issue. Guests moved between the barn and the open field. Around 100 lanterns were handed out and lit by hand. Some guests later said they felt uneasy about open flames in those conditions, but no one stopped the release. Delia and Caleb stood near the center of the group, holding their lantern together before letting it rise. Most of the lanterns lifted cleanly. A few did not. One failed to gain a stable lift and drifted back toward the crowd at low height. As it descended, the wire frame tilted, shifting the burning fuel cell off-center. The open flame pressed against the lantern's inner surface before it made contact with the lower section of Delia's dress. The synthetic fabric began melting almost immediately. Within seconds, it shrank and thinned under the heat before igniting. The contact lasted only seconds. The fire spread quickly across the outer layer of the gown. Delia stepped back, drawing in air that fed the flames. Within moments, it moved beyond the point of contact. Caleb and two nearby guests pulled her to the ground and tried to smother the fire using their hands and clothing. The flames were reduced, but the melted synthetic had already adhered to her lower body and legs, continuing to transfer heat even after the visible fire was out. A guest near the barn entrance called emergency services, but the nearest station was about 25 minutes away. Around the same time, another lantern drifted off course and entered the open barn doorway. It came into contact with the stacked straw along the interior wall. The material ignited almost immediately. Flames spread upward through the dry wooden structure, and smoke began pushing out through the entrance within minutes. Visibility dropped quickly. Delia was moved away from the immediate area, but she remained near the barn as conditions worsened. Firefighters arrived to find the barn fully involved. The structure was destroyed, along with sections of the surrounding grass. Several guests who had tried to help sustained minor to moderate burns and were treated at the scene or later released from local facilities. The post-mortem examination found that Delia had sustained deep burns over a significant portion of her body, most severe on her lower torso and legs, where the melted fabric had bonded to the skin. Her airway showed damage consistent with inhaling hot gases and smoke, indicating she was breathing during the early stages of the fire. The combination of extensive burns and inhalation injury was determined to be non-survivable. The cause of death was listed as thermal burns with inhalation injury, and the manner of death was ruled accidental. No criminal charges were filed. In the months that followed, local authorities issued warnings against the use of sky lanterns during dry, high-risk conditions. Restrictions on similar devices were later reinforced across parts of the state during wildfire season. It was May 10, 2014, at a small drop zone outside Elko, Nevada. The sky was clear and the winds were manageable. Two tandem pairs had boarded the same Cessna. On the ground, folding chairs were still arranged from the ceremony an hour before. Derek Paulson, 31, had planned most of the wedding himself. He worked as a regional sales representative across northern Nevada and southern Idaho, spending much of his time driving or on the phone closing deals. People who knew him said he was always pushing forward, always adding one more idea to whatever he was doing. The skydiving wedding was his idea from the start. His fiancée, Brianna, 30, agreed after completing a practice jump earlier that year. Derek had done 2 tandem jumps before, both smooth and uneventful, and he treated the experience as something he understood. In the weeks before the wedding, he added a cape. It was made of heavy nylon, wide, and attached to the shoulders of his jumpsuit so it would stand out on video. His instructor warned him clearly that loose fabric could behave unpredictably in freefall, creating uneven drag that would be hard to control in a tandem jump. Derek acknowledged the warning, but the cape stayed. It passed the final check still attached, visible to everyone, and no one removed it before boarding. Both pairs went through a standard briefing. The plan was simple. Brianna and her instructor would jump first, followed by Derek and his. At 12,000 feet, the door opened. The conditions were stable. Both pairs exited as planned. The moment Derek cleared the plane, the cape filled with air. It didn't trail evenly behind him. Instead, it pulled off to one side, dragging harder across his left shoulder. Within seconds, the pair began to rotate. His instructor adjusted his position to steady them, and for a moment it slowed, but the cape kept shifting, collapsing and filling again in uneven bursts. They couldn't settle into a stable position. On video, their movement stayed uneven and off-axis, never fully stabilizing, while Brianna's pair remained steady ahead. As the two pairs drifted closer for a brief mid-air moment, Derek and Brianna reached toward each other. It was meant to be a quick, symbolic gesture for the video, but that small movement changed the airflow around Derek's body. The cape, already unstable, caught the air unevenly and pulled harder to one side. His torso tilted further out of alignment. His shoulders dropped unevenly, and his head turned away from the direction of travel. The rotation deepened. Instead of stabilizing, their fall stayed uneven and slightly off-axis. His instructor tried to correct it, but the cape kept shifting and pulling unpredictably, undoing each adjustment. Altitude was dropping and they still weren't stable. The instructor deployed early. Normally, both bodies are aligned so the force spreads evenly, but this time it didn't. Derek's body was still significantly misaligned when the parachute deployed, with his upper and lower body pulling in different directions. As the canopy burst open above them, the harness tightened instantly. His lower body was yanked into position by the straps around his hips and legs, but his upper body lagged behind, still pulled off angle by the rotation and the drag of the cape. For a split second, his torso and hips were forced one way, while his head and neck continued another. The force didn't distribute evenly, it concentrated. The strain traveled sharply up his spine and into his neck. There was a sudden, violent snap in alignment as the opening shock completed. His body reacted immediately. The rotation stopped, but so did everything else. He went completely limp. His arms dropped. His head fell forward unnaturally, no longer holding position against the airflow. There was no attempt to correct, no movement at all. The instructor recognized it instantly and took full control, stabilizing the canopy and guiding the descent. On the ground, the staff was already being alerted by radio. When they landed, responders rushed in immediately. Derek was unresponsive. CPR began within seconds, but there was no reaction. Efforts continued, but the outcome did not change. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was a fatal injury to the cervical spine, caused by uneven force during parachute deployment. There were no signs of collision or impact before landing. The injury occurred at the exact moment the canopy opened. No criminal charges were filed, though civil actions followed. The drop zone updated its safety rules, tightening restrictions on non-approved gear in freefall. The cape was retained as part of the investigation record. It was June 7, 2015, at a private waterfront estate on Star Island, Miami Beach. The pool was already running the fog effect before the first guest sat down. The surface of the water had disappeared beneath a flat white layer. From the back rows, it looked like the aisle led straight into clouds. The bride, Camille Oduya, 24, wanted her wedding to feel like a fairy tale. She had once planned to finish a marine biology degree, but paused her studies to help support her family, taking a receptionist job at a local hotel in Miramar. Friends described her as steady and easy to be around. For her wedding, she focused on one detail more than anything else: the entrance. She wanted to walk through what looked like clouds, a soft, dreamlike aisle that felt unreal. The venue, a private estate on Star Island, was chosen for its visual impact. At the center was a large swimming pool. The event planner proposed building a narrow walkway across part of the pool and covering the water with a thick layer of dry ice fog to create the illusion of a floating aisle. Camille agreed immediately. It became the defining feature of the ceremony. On the day of the wedding, large amounts of dry ice were placed in containers throughout the pool. By the time guests were seated, the fog had built into a dense, continuous layer sitting low over the water. The space was partially enclosed by hedges and decorative walls, limiting airflow and trapping the fog in place. Additional lighting around the pool reflected off the surface, making it appear flat and solid. From most angles, there was no visible waterline, just a white cloud-like surface stretching across the aisle. No formal safety check had been done on the setup. The fog was thicker than originally planned, but the ceremony moved forward. Just after sunset, music began. Camille entered on her father's arm and stepped onto the walkway. From the guest's perspective, she appeared to be walking across clouds. The fog remained dense and undisturbed around the platform. About halfway down the aisle, her heel caught the inner layer of her gown. The fabric bunched slightly under her foot. She stumbled forward and lost her balance. With no railing along the walkway, she fell sideways off the edge and into the pool. The drop was short. She entered at an angle into the shallow section, where the water reached about waist height. The impact itself did not appear severe. Several guests reacted with brief laughter, assuming she would stand up immediately, but she did not. The gown absorbed water almost instantly. The multiple layers grew heavy, pulling tight around her legs and restricting movement. As she tried to push herself upright, the fabric held her down and kept her off balance. Her upper body dipped below the surface, and each attempt to stand only tangled the material further. Above the water, nothing appeared to change. The fog remained thick and unbroken. The lighting continued to reflect across it, hiding any movement beneath. From the aisle and seating area, there was no clear sign that she was still in the pool. Some guests assumed she had already stood and moved out of view. Others looked toward the spot but could not see through the fog. Time passed without recognition of an emergency. From a lower angle on the far side of the pool, where the fog was thinner, one guest noticed a dark shape beneath the surface. They called out. Two others rushed in and pulled Camille out of the water. She was unresponsive. CPR was started immediately. Emergency services were called and arrived within minutes. Resuscitation efforts continued on site, but were unsuccessful. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning. There were no significant injuries from the fall, only minor abrasions consistent with contact against the pool edge. The report noted that the waterlogged gown restricted her movement, and the dense fog obscured visibility, delaying recognition of the emergency. Investigators found the fog density exceeded safe levels and that no proper risk assessment had been conducted for the setup. The event planner was charged with negligence, and the venue faced a civil lawsuit filed by Camille's family. The case prompted tighter safety guidelines for using fog effects around open water at events. It was September 21st, 2013, in Priano, Italy. The road was dry and the sky was clear. Traffic was light. The reception had ended well, and the car pulled away from the venue to the sound of guests cheering and tin cans scraping against asphalt. The newlywed was Serena Vitale, 26, from Maiori, raised in a family tied to local business. She studied accounting and worked at a small hotel, living a steady, practical life. Co-workers described her as organized and calm. Luca Ferrante, 28, was from a nearby coastal town and worked as a driver and mechanic for a luxury rental company, often handling vintage cars for clients. He was experienced on coastal roads and known among colleagues as careful and reliable. For their wedding departure, Luca's employer offered a 1960s Alfa Romeo Spider. It matched the setting and the tone of the celebration. Before the couple got in, friends added a traditional touch, tying empty tin cans to the rear bumper. The idea was simple. The rattling noise would draw attention as the couple drove off, a playful way to celebrate and send them into married life. The cans were attached with a length of rope and left to drag freely behind the car. The couple got in as guests gathered nearby, cheering and taking photos. A photographer near the entrance captured the moment as the car pulled away. The cans bounced and skipped along the pavement, clattering loudly as the vehicle moved forward. The route ahead followed a narrow coastal stretch with sharp curves, uneven pavement, and low stone barriers along the edge. Beyond those barriers, the terrain dropped steeply. At night, visibility relied mostly on headlights. Luca maintained a steady speed, keeping the car controlled as they continued. Behind them, the cans dragged continuously, the rope trailing loosely and shifting slightly with each turn. Approximately 1.5 miles from the venue, the road passed over a section where the pavement met a rough stone edge near a drainage cutout. The trailing rope drifted outward as the car moved through a slight curve. The rope and cans caught against the stone edge. The resistance was sudden and came from one side rather than directly behind the vehicle. The rear of the car pulled fractionally left. The noise pattern changed in the same instant. A sharp interruption in the rhythmic scraping that had been constant since departure. Luca reacted. A motorist traveling behind the Alfa Romeo later told investigators the car shifted within its lane almost immediately after the sound changed. Luca steered to correct. On a road with almost no shoulder and a stone barrier less than a meter from the outer lane edge, the margin was already gone before the second input came. The correction was too strong. The car crossed the center of its lane, and the front right corner struck the low barrier at the road's outer edge. The barrier, an old stone construction, partially gave way under the impact. The car rode up over the remaining section and left the road. The motorist behind stopped immediately and called emergency services. The call was placed within seconds of the vehicle going over. The Alfa Romeo struck rock outcroppings on the way down before entering the water. Coast Guard units reached the site within approximately 22 minutes. Both occupants were recovered from the submerged vehicle. The post-mortem on Serena Vitale found a severe injury to the bones and structures of the upper neck, consistent with violent high-impact force during the fall. The injury would have caused immediate and complete loss of function. She did not survive the descent. Luca Ferrante sustained serious head and chest injuries during the same fall, but the examination found evidence that he remained alive briefly after the car entered the water. He was unable to exit the submerged vehicle and drowned. Both deaths were ruled accidental. Investigators confirmed the vehicle had no mechanical defects prior to the incident. The rope and cans were identified as a contributing factor through snagging and the resulting driver distraction on a road with no margin for error. No charges were filed. The incident was later cited in regional safety discussions about unsecured objects attached to vehicles operating on narrow coastal roads.